A Blacksburg couple is back home after making a cross-country trip by bike in less than 2 months. It's in honor of their son, Ozzy, who died 3 days after he was born due to complications of preeclampsia. 10 News reporter Irisha Jones first reported their story and checks back in with the couple about their ride.
We ended up going off route quite a bit.
Ozzy's ride for research spanned thousands of miles across several states.
There were some times I didn't know if I was going to keep going. So the first 3 days were just straight uphill.
Carly Lindy and her husband rode on this tandem bike from San Diego to Jacksonville, Florida.
I did ride a week by myself on the tandem, and that's hard.
Their reason to keep going is their son, Ozzy. He was born early due to complications of preeclampsia.
So I got to talk about him more, and I wasn't used to that, being able to talk about him in a positive light.
The mission of the ride was to raise money for preeclampsia research and awareness about the condition.
Most people I talk to have never heard of the word, or they heard of its old name, toxemia. But almost all of them know pregnant people. And so they're like, oh, I'm going to go tell them, which is exactly what I wanted.
They documented the trip with pictures and videos. Carly met others with a similar experience on the journey.
We ran into someone, 4th day, had it. I kept thinking about her the whole time.
This car seat on the back symbolizes Ozzy being part of the trip in spirit.
I fell a lot, so I think he would laugh, but I think he would be happy. I think he would wish he would have been there.
Pedaling almost 3,000 miles raised more than $20,000 to fund a year-long research grant. In Blacksburg, Irisha Jones, 10 News, working for you.